Well, hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software. And today we'll be taking a somewhat technical dive back into the Transform programming language, and we'll be dealing with a topic today that has to do with populating lists. Almost all of you are familiar with the list choice, which is one of the control types in Alpha Transform. So a list choice lets you choose among different options in a list. And here we're taking a look at a list control or a list choice, list field here in the command window view. And you'll see you can actually search through. If you have a very long list, you're allowed to search. You're allowed to add new things to a list. You can choose multiple or individual items. But by default, we set it to single choice and we set it to no search. And the way typically you would populate something like this is you would go into list items and actually type in your list choices. But imagine if your list choices weren't just choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, but was like a whole catalog of products. You wanted to be able to look up a particular product, perhaps from inventory, and see if it's there. Now, you could fill in, you could maybe even copy and paste in a list of all of your products and their inventory levels right here in this list items thing. But the problem, of course, is that your inventory levels are going to change every single day. Maybe what products you even carry may change every day. And it would be ridiculous to have to update your form type every day and get your users to go and update their form types on their phones as well. So what would be super cool would be if there was a way to programmatically decide what goes into those lists and maybe allow them to be updated automatically. So that's what we are going to do here today. Oh, and I see that Sarah has just joined us. Hold on a moment while I make Sarah an organizer here. Make an organizer. There we go. Hey there, welcome, Sarah. So Sarah, as you know, is in charge of our documentation department here, but if you have any questions, go ahead and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, and Sarah will be here to handle those. Anyway, back to our discussion. So the question is, how do we programmatically decide how to add items here? And today I'm going to show you a few examples of how to do that. So let me hop over to my PowerPoint, and we're going to scroll down to slide 173. Dynamically populating lists. Okay. So today I'm going to show you three different ways of populating a list. One way is simply by having TPL literally insert hard-coded values into this list. The reason you might want to do this is this might be a list in which some of the choices are dependent on previous choices. For example, if a piece of equipment you could say is a gas or electric, and if you chose gas, then the next drop-down might say something like, you know, have you checked the fuel level? Have you checked the oil level? There might be some other list that's dependent on the first list. So that would be a reason to do that in TPL. I'm also going to show you, though, how to pull that data from an API and load that into your list, which, of course, only works if you have a connection. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is how to pull a list from an onboard SQL Server database. And we're going to go through the code on how to do all of those. So let me go ahead and get started. So this is the simplest case. Here I've taken a list that I call my list, and I've populated it with first choice and second choice. And here is what I would have to do. Here's the code that I would use in order to do that. Let me pop over to Transform Central, though, and show you the code editor, just so that I can put this in context. So here we are on my form, and I'm going to go ahead and edit the custom code. And here I had one called Programmed Choices. So I'm going to click on the editor here. And now this is the TPL code, the Transform Programming Language code that will fire as soon as I open up the editor on my phone. So the first thing it does, and I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint because it's easier to read the code there. The first thing that it does is it sets a variable called s equal to args of 1. Now, you probably have no idea what that means, or you may guess that args means arguments, and it does. But args of 1, when you're talking about a list, are the choices, is an object or a pointer to the choices in that list. So just bear with me here for a moment. We have something called S, and S has got something called args.1. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to build an array. We're going to call it list, and we're going to put two values into that list. So value 0, keep in mind our list arrays in TPL are 0-based, so the first one starts at 0, not at 1. So list of 0 equals obj value first choice. And what we've inserted here is called an object. And this is the format that we need to use when we're setting list choices in TransForm. For the second one, it's list sub 1, that's the second choice. We set the object value and we set second choice. And now we have populated this with first choice, second choice. And then the last thing we do is we just say s.qlist equals list. QList is a property of S, and it became a property of S when we set it equal to args. And there is documentation on this somewhat in the online documentation department, but in the online documentation system. But if you just want to use this as a reference, in fact, if you want to send me an email to tfservice@alphasoftware.com, I can send you out my sample code later. So this is just the code that you need here for really simply populating those two list values. Now, I think everyone here has pretty much got that. So let's move on to a more sophisticated example. So now imagine instead of us forcing that those values in there, just using TPL code, instead we decided to look up those values from an API. So I built sort of a dummy API here, which I'm going to allow you to use. And I'm going to just grab that URL and I'll show you what it does. So this is an external URL, and what it does is it gives us back a list of partners, or they may be customers to our business. And let me just open it up in Safari and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Move that out of the way. So I'm going to paste in this URL. And this is what I get back for data. It's all JSON data. There's an ID, a name, a username, email, and then under address, there's a sub items for street, city, and zip code. And even then there's a sub item for geo, latitude, longitude. So this is array which has got several different parts. So going back to my code example here in PowerPoint, if we go to the next page, I'm going to show you if you called this how to call this in TransForm, and then how to actually parse that data and put it into the list choices. It's going to happen here on this page. So again, like last time, we start out with s equals args of 1, and we end with s.qlist equals list. But this time, when we fill up this list array, we're going to be using some different code. The first thing we do is we just set a variable equal to the URL where we want to get our data from. And this is the one I just pasted in. Actually, this is a different one than the one I just pasted in, but we'll get back to that in a minute. What we're going to do here, actually, let me make sure that I'm showing you the right piece of code here. Yeah, I am showing you the right piece of code. Okay, great. What we're going to do here is we're going to use the ajaxGET command in TPL, and that's going to set R equal to a value of what ajaxGET returns. So the R value can contain a couple of different things. If it's unable to find anything, it's going to find an error, in which case we're just going to have it show a warning saying you couldn't connect to the service, and that's it. It's just sort of a way of trapping errors so that they don't go on and become bigger errors. However, assuming that does in fact work and there are no errors, we're going to set a variable called rdata equal to, and now here's a TPL function called JSON parse, and that takes the response text from our R variable, and it parses it into an array called rdata. And then we set our data, then we set a global variable here to our data. Now we don't use this global variable in this particular script. We are going to use it later. So if you're saying, why do we do this? Is it necessary? No, we don't actually need this line, but I'm going to move on and I'll tell you in a moment why we did set a global variable for that. The next thing we do is we create a new variable called list, and we set it equal to an array. We create a new variable called row. We set it equal to an object. And then we go through a loop. Again, we're doing a 0-based array, so it's for I equals 0 to, and this is the length of values in our data. So the number of data values that we got back minus 1 because it's a zero-based array. Next up, we just set our row, which we'd set as an object before, equal to the data value of what was contained in our data, which is what we got back from the URL when we did our ajaxGET. Lastly, we set item equal to an object, and then we set the item value equal to row.contact name. Now, contact name is one of the names that we got from our list. Let me show you this because in a moment ago I showed you some of the data we got back, but it is a little bit different, this URL than the other URL, so I don't want you to get confused here. Let me see if I can do this here. Bang. Okay, yeah, this is more like it. You guys probably recognize this. This is the Northwind Database, and I've placed it up on Alpha Cloud here. And here it's got a two pieces. One's called values, and then it shows you all of within the values the customer ID, the company name, and all that. So when I'm back here in my script, sorry, let me go back into the PowerPoint. When I'm back here in my script, I know that because I already know the structure of this data, that there is going to be a value called contact name in each one of the rows. There's also going to be one called address. There's going to be one called phone. There's going to be one called ID and a few others. But here we're just interested in the name. So now that we've set item.value equal to the name, we go back to our list array. And using this syntax, list of length of list is equal to item, we set the very next value for list equal to the contact name that we pulled from the row. Now, a lot of you guys are pretty good programmers. You can probably figure out what this syntax means. What that really means is append something to the end of the list. So however long the list is, add 1 to it and just add this item to it. The N4 occurs here. We go looping through and we fill up the entire list array with the contact names that we have pulled here. Okay, so hopefully you guys are with me so far. At the very end, we do like we did in the last example, and we set s.qlist equal to our list array, and that will populate. In a moment, I'm going to show you these guys actually working on my phone. So now let's move on to one last example. And the API example is great because it can pull up to the minute information from a web service. However, TransForm is meant to be used on a mobile device. That mobile device sometimes may not have service depending on your use case. So we also allow you to place SQL Server databases on your device and query them in TPL as well. And a couple of weeks ago, I showed you an example of how to use the manifest and how to actually create those SQL databases that you can place onto the device. So if you remember that, this part here might make a little bit of sense. I have an on-device database that I have stored at server.alphasoftware.com/bitbucket sample data customers.db, right? Now in the on-device manifest, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let me just show you because it only takes a second. We're going to go back to the home button. We're going to go to define on-device assets. And what I'm talking about is this section here. When you fill out this section here, it tells the TransForm app what resources it needs to load and store directly on the device. And in this case, I'm going to show you this back here in PowerPoint because it's bigger and easier to read. We have a SQLite database. Now there are a couple of gotchas here. First of all, make sure that when you place your database in there, you use type SQLite. Otherwise, the system isn't going to know it's a SQLite database. The second thing is, unlike other types of files, you cannot put your SQLite databases into subfolders. So in my previous example, let me just pop back here. For example, I said here I've got a Zamboni manual.pdf, and I want you to put that in a target folder called PDF docs. With SQLite, you don't want to use a PDF target folder. You don't want to use a target folder, so make sure you do not include that or it won't work. Okay, so let's dive into the code that's actually required to read that database. And it's actually pretty simple now that we've seen the other two things. We begin by using by setting a variable equal to our select statement. So here we're going to select contact name from the table customers. Okay, so that's just set into a variable. Next, we're going to set another variable called SQL results, and we're going to use this function called PhoneGap tfexecute SQL. And this takes two parameters. The first parameter it takes, and it actually can take a third one, but I'm going to show you the first two. The first parameter it takes is the name of the table, that's customers.db. And the second is the SQL statement that we want to feed to our SQLite engine, and that's what we set up here. And this, the answer to that will be put back in SQL results. Now, if SQL results is less than 1, we probably have something wrong, and we know at this point we're just gonna end our script. However, if it does come back with more than 0 results, we are going to start yet another loop. And in this case, we're going to use the term data. We used list before, but this time we're going to say data equals array. So we're going to set data equal to a blank array value, and we're going to again do a loop. And this time we're looping through our SQL results. Again, 0-based array, so we start with a 0 and we have a -1 at the end. And we use length of SQL results to determine the number of rows that are in that SQL result. And then from here, we set row, a variable, equal to SQL results. Obj, and we reinitialize as an object. And then we set object.value equal to row.contact name. Again, that is the field name in the customers table that has the name of the customer. Down here under data, we have data of I equals object, and the data array, which we set to as an array here, has this object now set to it. And we have, so it's called object. The object has got a value, and that's been now set into here. And as we loop through, we read another row into row, and we set that data back into this variable called data. At the end of it, now listen, we've sort of structured it a little bit differently. We still have that s equals args equals 1, because it actually doesn't matter when you call that. You can call that now, or you can call it, but you just have to call it before you set that QList value. So in our previous examples, I had s equals args of 1 up here, but it's fine down here as well. We're going to set QList equal to data, and then that's it, and that will populate the lists. So let's just do a live demo to show you what I'm talking about, and then I'm going to show you two other things, including the debugger, which I found awfully handy when I was putting these together. So let me go ahead and show you that. So here's my phone, and here is my form. I call it an amazing TPL example. Somewhat amazing, but I called it that just so that alphabetically it would appear at the top of the list. All right. So programmed choices, that was the one I showed you where we just programmed it into list 1 and list 2. So I'm going to click on that, and there, I'm sorry, first item and second item, and there it is. And if I wanted to debug that, I could, but I'm not going to debug that one. That one's too simple. Here's the one where we did a choice from an API. So I'm going to choose choices from API. And that is the Northwind's data. You might remember the first person in Northwind's, Maria Anders. And that's all in there. And now here are my choices from the online database. And that's the fastest of all because it doesn't have to make any sorts of calls. All right. Now, when I choose something from this list, let's choose John Steele, for example. You'll see that John Steele's information has been filled out. I haven't showed you the code how to do that, but I will show you in a moment how to do that. But one thing I'd like to point out is, as I was building this code, I found the debugger to be really quite handy. And here's why. When sometimes if I'd make a syntax error or something like that, it wasn't really clear where my mistake was. So I turned on the debugger. Right here you can see, I'm going to use my mouse to circle it, but you can see this little turquoise button which says debug. And you can actually turn that on your own device. You do that from the help menu. So you have to go back out to the list of forms, choose the hamburger menu, and choose help. Okay. While you're in the help menu, you're going to choose show table of contents, and then you're going to scroll down to tools for support. And I'm going to tap on tools for support, and here are some support tools that we have here. Right now at the very bottom, it says set the debug state to shown or hidden. And right now I have it set to shown, which is why I have my turquoise button there. Okay, great. So I'm going to exit help, and I'm going to go back to add form, and I'm going to choose an amazing TPL example. And then I'm going to show you how to debug it. You actually don't have to go into a field to debug it. As soon as you open up the form, you can debug it. So I'm going to click debug here. And now right here at the very bottom, there's another hamburger menu. I'm going to go ahead and click that hamburger menu. Boom. And I'm going to choose run function. And now those are the functions that I had defined at TransForm Central. The simplest one was program choices. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, I'm going to step right through that. So you see that little icon there? I'm just going to click on that to tell it I want to step through. I'm sorry, my bad. That one's grayed out. I have to click on the one up here. I make that mistake. And I'm going to click code. And I'm going to scroll down to where my code is. And you'll see that my code is highlighted in yellow. And now at the bottom, I'm going to step through that code. So the first thing it's going to do is set s equal to args1, then list equals the array, list object is equal to this object, the second object in that array is equal to second choice, and then set the list, and now it's done. Okay. Now, if I had run into an error during this time, it would have showed me on what line I've run into an error. And some of the errors that I've run into, let me just show you since all of my code is here, are, for example, I called the customers table customer.db, for example. And so when this line ran, that's where I saw a crash, and I know, oh, time to go double check that. So this debugger is really quite helpful. Also, it'll show you the values of the fields. I don't have any set right now, but put code up here. And the variables, if you tap here on these rows. Nothing right now is set in this form, so you're not going to see anything. All right, let me close out of that. So those are my 3 lookup choices that you saw working. And the next question I'm going to get is, how did I do the actual lookup? In other words, once I made a selection, how did it know how to fill in the other fields? So let me show you the TPL behind that. I'm going to go ahead and close my mirroring here. And we'll go back over to TransForm Central. Okay, so if you recall, in each case, I had used the editor event, meaning when the editor is open, that's when I wanted to fill up those that list with choices. So in this case, fill up the list of choices using an API. In this case, we're going to fill up the list of choices using static choices. And then finally, in this choice, we're going to fill up the editor using the online SQLite. Now, we also have this event called changed, and changed is going to fire when I select one of the ones that were in that list. So let me show you how changed works. And I believe I've placed changed in PowerPoint so that it's bigger and easier to read. Let me move down. Yep, I did. A little bit bigger anyway. So this is how it works. Again, we start out with setting a variable called SQL equal to our, I'm sorry, is this looking up or setting? This isn't setting at all. Hang on. Let me add a new slide. We'll put this in for you right now. All right, let's pop over here to TransForm. Grab my choices, copy that, paste. There we go. All right. So this is my unchanged code. This time when I'm going to set SQL equal to select, and I've got more fields. Remember last time it was just contact name. This time I'm choosing company name, address, city, postal code, country, and phone. Again from the customers table. And I said where contact name, I now have a where clause, that's a filtering clause, where contact name equals question mark. And that question mark, if you're familiar with Alpha Anywhere or other systems, is in fact an argument, meaning that I'm going to tell you what that value is later when I actually make the call. And here's where I make the call. So I set again a variable called SQL results, and I set that to PhoneGap tf execute SQL command. I tell it which table I want to use, what the SQL command is, and this time I'm going to also give it an argument. That's going to fill in where this question mark is. And that argument is called DB choice list, and that's actually the list that we're on right now. So if I selected, for example, John Steele as the contact name from my list, when this evaluated, it would say where contact name equals John Steele, because that's going to be what's contained in the DB choice list. So that's how we're doing that filtering. Here, it's really simple. We don't have to loop through anything because we're just going to get back one result. And we're going to say and we're going to take a look at that one result. So we're going to say row equals SQL results of 0. Again, 0-based index, so the first value is a 0. And then it's just a matter of setting each of the fields in TransForm equal to its corresponding value from that row variable. So the company field in TransForm is set to row.company, the address field row.address, city, postcode, country, phone, and so on. These are the ones that are coming from the table, and these are the ones that are coming from TransForm. And that's all there is in order to set that. So that's, oh, I see someone's pointed out that I was in the wrong spot before where I was trying to show you on editor. Thank you. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. So that's basically what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you 3 different ways that you can dynamically populate your pick list, sort of explain why you'd want to do that, give you examples, and then show you, once you've populated, how to actually do a lookup, in this case, from a onboard SQLite database. Now, I'm taking a look here through questions. There aren't a ton, but one is, can the list be sorted? And the answer is, it might be possible to do it in TPL ahead of time, but I would probably, if I could, put the sorting task back on the data source itself. So, for example, before I populated my SQLite database, I would put the records in the order in which I wanted to fetch them. In the case of performing, however, in the case of SQLite, you do have the ability to use a sort statement. I don't have the syntax for it here, but you can just Google that if you want to get them back in a particular order. Once they're in, once you already have them in an array, it's probably possible using TPL to sort them. I don't know how to do it. But again, I would suggest that you get the data values pre-sorted if that's a capability. Often APIs do let you say, give me back this data and give it back to me in this order. So that would be my answer to that question. Do we have any other questions? It doesn't look like it. Again, if you want my sample code, sample databases, whatever, just send an email to tfservice@alphasoftware.com, and I will be happy to send them over. So thank you so much for attending today's Transform Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care and goodbye.